Good morning, everybody. So, our last thing that we're doing with rational expressions, kind of, is adding and subtracting. And that is harder than multiplying and dividing because you have to find a common denominator. So, it works in the same style as adding and subtracting regular fractions, but based on my past years of experience teaching, I bet most of you don't remember how to add and subtract regular fractions, which is fine. We're going to get there. So first off, let's talk about lowest, or actually I think often it's least. I forget which L word. Least common multiple. So lately we've been talking a lot about greatest common factor, which is basically the opposite of least common multiple. So you would say the greatest common factor of 6 and 8 is 2, because 2 is the biggest number that goes into 6 and goes into 8. All right? Least common multiple of 6 and 8 is the smallest number, least, that 6 and 8 both go into. So it has to be equal to or bigger than 8. So now we're talking about bigger numbers. So, 6 goes into 12, but 8 doesn't go evenly into 12. 8 goes into 16, but 6 doesn't go evenly into 16. 6 goes into 18, but 8 doesn't go evenly into 18. And so the smallest number that 6 and 8 both go into is 24. Okay? So greatest common factor is the number that goes into them. Least common multiple is the number that they go into. Okay? Greatest common factor, you're looking for the biggest number that goes into them. Least common multiple, you're looking for the smallest number that they go into. Okay? And you can get that essentially by starting to list multiples. So for 6, 12, 18, 24, well, we'd start with 6 actually. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, and then you see that the first number on the list that appears in both lists is 24. So let's continue. So we're talking about least common multiple. So for example, and sometimes, here's the thing, you can always find a common multiple, some number that they both go into, by just multiplying them together. So for example, with 6 and 8, 6 times 8 equals 48. So we know that 48 is a common multiple of 6 and 8, because 6 goes into 48 8 times, and 8 goes into 48 6 times. It's just not the least common multiple. So worst case scenario, you can always find a common multiple, but it's preferable if it's the least common multiple. Okay? Okay, so for example, if you wanted to find LCM, least common multiple, of 3 and 5, multiples of 3 are 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, etc. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, etc. The first number that appears on both lists is 15. So the least common multiple of 3 and 5 is 15. And in that case, it is just 3 times 5, right? That time, just multiplying them together worked. But got to double check. So that's the least common multiple of 3 and 5. Say, let's see, least common multiple of 4 and 10, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 10, 20, 30, etc. But I already see I've got my 20 here. The least common multiple of 4 and 10 is 20. 4 times 5, 10 times 2, they both come out to be 20. Least common multiple of 9 and 18. So for 9, we've got 9, 18, 27, 36. For 18, you've got 18, 36, 54, 18 is the first. That's why it's important that when you're listing the multiples, you start with the number itself, because sometimes the least common multiple is whatever the biggest number is. Because 9 goes into 18, then 18 is the least common multiple. 9 times 2 or 18 times 1. So you can't forget those number goes into itself things. So there's some LCM stuff, okay? And it's generally, it's one of these three options. Either the least common multiple is the two numbers multiplied together, least common multiple is some smaller number that they both go into, or least common multiple is the bigger number. It's never going to be the smaller number, because the bigger number will never go into the smaller number. Okay, so all that comes back to adding fractions. So if you add fractions, 1/2 plus 5/2, I don't know if you guys remember this, but if you're just adding these two fractions, you might want to say 6/4. 1 plus 5 is 6, 2 plus 2 is 4. That is wrong! When you add fractions and the denominator, the bottom number, is the same, then it stays the same in the final fraction, and the tops get added. So 1/2 plus 5/2 equals 6/2. Think of it if you had 1/2 and then you added 5/2, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what you'd end up with is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/2, right? Not 6/4. 6/4 would only be 1 1/2, 3/2, right? So the bottom number is like a thing. It's like 1 pencil plus 5 pencils equals 6 pencils. That's why this stays the same. 1/2 plus 5/2 is 6/2, okay? Now, if you have fractions that have different denominators, that's when things get spicy. You need these to have the same denominator in order to add them, okay? So we can't, because, you know, it's supposed to stay the same, but if you have different ones, what's it supposed to stay the same as? So that's where our least common multiple comes in. I'm going to add these like this. We have to find the least common multiple of 3 and 5. Now, luckily, we already did that in my previous example. The least common multiple of 3 and 5 is 15. So that's what our denominator for our end result is going to be. So right here, this is set up to multiply by another fraction. And whatever we multiply by here should equal 15. 3 times something equals 15. So 3 times 5 is 15. Right here, 5 times 3 is 15. Now the question is, what do I put up here? Well, we don't want to change the value of the fraction, okay? So all we're going to put up here is what it will take to keep this fraction equal to 1. Because then we're multiplying 2/3 times 1, we're not really changing the value of the fraction, okay? So a number divided by itself is 1. So 2/3 times 5/5 is really the same as 2/3 times 1. 2 times 5 is 10. Right here, 1/5 times 3/3 is the same as 1/5 times 1. So 1 times 3 is 3. And now we add 10/15 plus 3/15 is 13/15. Okay. All right. One more. Five eighths minus 1/6. So again, we found the least common multiple of 8 and 6. We said that it was 24. Okay. 8 times what equals 24? 3. 6 times what equals 24? 4. And then the number on top always has to be the same. That's how you're multiplying it by 1, so the value stays the same. 5 times 3 is 15. 1 times 4 is 4. So we've got 15/24 minus 4/24. And that's going to equal 11/24. This one was a minus. All right. So that's our intro to fractions. And I didn't have time to get into what we're actually doing.